I overheard my father telling my brother, "Your brother? He's not getting one single thing." Mom was smiling, so I transferred all funds that night. Imagine overhearing your own parents toast to cutting you out of the family, celebrating your demise while you stood just inches away. Now, imagine discovering in that same moment that your entire life was a lie, that you were adopted, and they resented you for it. The air in that house often felt thick with unspoken resentments, a silence that hummed with favoritism. But nothing could have prepared me for the actual words spoken that night, or the cold, cruel laughter that followed. I'm Ethan, 28 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the invisible son. My younger brother, Kyle, 25, was the golden child, God's gift to humanity in my parents' eyes. Me? I was just scenery, the background character no one truly cared about. The favoritism in our home wasn't subtle, it was a glaring, undeniable truth, the kind that would make a family therapist demand a double session. This wasn't just sibling rivalry. This was a textbook case of golden child versus scapegoat. Let me break this down for you. Since I turned 18, I was expected to pour myself into the family business, Hartman Restorations, while Kyle just existed. I worked 60-hour weeks, transforming it from a modest $2 million operation into a thriving $15 million empire. Kyle? He dropped by maybe twice a year for a photo op. Yet, he was praised for simply drawing breath, while my monumental efforts were deemed adequate. Adequate. I'd literally tripled the company's revenue, and that was the word they chose. The double standards were relentless. I graduated high school with honors, working part-time at the shop, and my parents simply said, "That's nice," before returning to plan Kyle's lavish graduation party. His GPA was a dismal 2.4 after 5 years, having failed 2 classes. When I secured our biggest client ever, the prestigious Jacobson Museum contract, worth $3 million over 5 years, my dad, Richard, looked at Kyle and said, "Great job on the networking." Kyle had never even met anyone from that museum. I made every call, drove 3 hours each way for meetings, and he got all the credit. I still remember making the honor roll every semester for 4 years straight in high school. My celebration? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Kyle, however, received a brand new car for passing his driver's test on his 3rd attempt. Apparently, basic driving competency, eventually achieved, warranted a $15,000 reward. Academic excellence? Just a dismissive "that's nice, dear." Christmas was another cruel joke. Kyle's mountain of presents, the latest gaming systems, designer clothes, anything he'd whined about for months, would practically touch the ceiling. My pile? Whatever was on clearance. Maybe a flannel shirt if I was lucky. Occasionally, something useful for my projects. Practical gifts, Gloria, my mom, would say, a smug smile plastered on her face, as if she deserved an award for buying me work gloves while Kyle unwrapped a brand new laptop. The thing is, Kyle was just as bad, entitled and selfish, always reveling in his golden child status. He'd constantly rub it in. "Mom said yes to me, but she'd probably say no to you," he'd smirk. Or he'd accidentally break my things. One time, he left my meticulously restored vintage radio, a project I'd spent 6 months on, out in the rain. When I blew up, my parents lectured me about being less materialistic. Yet, when I accidentally stepped on Kyle's shoelace, causing him to trip, I was grounded for a week. I learned early I was on my own. So, I kept my mouth shut, head down, and worked my butt off. Got my first real job at the shop at 16, saved every penny, devoured everything I could about the business. I told myself I didn't need their validation, but every night, alone in my tiny room, the smallest in the house, a converted storage closet, while Kyle had a spacious suite with its own bathroom, I could hear them laughing downstairs with him. When I was 13 and asked to switch, Gloria simply said I should be grateful to have a room at all. That summed it up. Richard would take Kyle to baseball games, car shows, all the classic father-son outings from movies. When I'd ask to join, it was always, "Next time, buddy," or "This is a Kyle thing." That next time never came. There was no Ethan thing. Just me, alone in the garage, teaching myself how to fix things because no one else was going to. But then there was Grandpa Charles. He was the only one who truly saw me. My dad's father, an old-school army mechanic who could rebuild an engine blindfolded. A legend. While Richard and Gloria cheered on Kyle's mediocre baseball games, I was in Grandpa's garage, learning to rebuild carburetors and replace transmissions. Those were the only days I felt seen, valued. "You got something special in those hands, boy," he'd say, his eyes twinkling. "Your dad never had the patience for this stuff. Always chasing the next promotion." He'd shake his head, a quiet disappointment in his son. Grandpa Charles saw right through my parents' facade. Like the time, when I was 15, they completely forgot my birthday. Not "we'll celebrate later" forgot, but genuinely forgot March 15th existed. They remembered Kyle had a party to go to, and everyone had to drive him there. Gloria actually said, "Oh, it's your birthday tomorrow, isn't it? We'll celebrate next weekend." No cake, no gifts, no celebration. That next weekend never materialized. When Grandpa found out, he was furious. He showed up that night with a beautiful set of precision tools I'd been eyeing for months. "Happy birthday, kiddo," he boomed, loud enough for Richard and Gloria to hear. Some things are worth celebrating properly. The look on Richard's face, half embarrassed, half annoyed, was priceless. Every Christmas, while I unwrapped practical gifts like socks, Grandpa would sneak me something real, quality tools I still use today. One year, my parents complained. Gloria actually had the nerve to say, "He doesn't need to be spoiled, Charles," as if a decent set of wrenches was equivalent to Kyle's new gaming console. Grandpa Charles just stared her down. "Recognizing talent isn't spoiling, Gloria. It's investing." Then he winked at me. When I was 20, Grandpa Charles was diagnosed with Parkinson's. It was devastating. He couldn't work on cars anymore, couldn't do what made him feel alive. I spent every spare moment with him, even when my parents complained I was neglecting family obligations, meaning I wasn't covering for Kyle's frequent absences at the shop. Before he passed 3 years ago, he pulled me aside. His hands shook, but his eyes were piercingly clear. "Don't trust your father, Ethan," he whispered. "I've seen how he looks at that company, like it's just money waiting to be spent. Promise me you'll protect what we built." I promised. I had no idea then just how crucial that promise would become. You need to understand Hartman Restorations. Grandpa Charles started it in 1965 with nothing but a single-bay garage and a knack for bringing old cars back to life. By the time he got too sick, it was a 16-bay facility with 31 employees, museum contracts across 3 states, and a pristine reputation built over decades. When Richard took over, things slowly, subtly, began to shift. Equipment orders that didn't quite add up. Vendors I'd never heard of. Expenses that seemed inflated. I flagged some of it to Richard, but he just told me to focus on my job and stop playing accountant. So I did. My biggest mistake. For the next 3 years, I buried myself in the work, while Richard, Gloria, and Kyle handled the business side. I rebuilt engines, restored classics, trained new guys, brought in clients. The company kept growing, so I convinced myself everything was fine. I was so incredibly naive. Then, last month, everything shattered. I was working late at the shop, not unusual for me. What was unusual was hearing voices from the kitchen area, Richard, Gloria, and Kyle. Kyle rarely showed up during regular hours, let alone after hours. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I just wanted coffee before tackling the Henderson project. But then I heard my name, and something inside me froze. I pressed my ear against the door. Richard's voice sliced through the silence like a cold blade. "Kyle gets everything. The house, the business, the investments, all the offshore accounts. Ethan? He's not getting a single thing." Gloria's laughter followed, sharp, cruelly triumphant. The kind of laugh that utterly defines your place in a family. He never deserved it anyway. Always so eager to please. Like a stray dog begging for scraps. Did you see how hard he worked on that Henderson estimate? Almost felt bad for him. My hands began to tremble. Through a tiny crack in the door, I watched them clink their glasses. 28 years. 28 years of being their son. 20 years of late nights, covering Kyle's phantom shifts, taking the blame for his screw-ups, being the reliable workhorse who never complained. And they'd already erased me, written me out of existence like a clerical error they'd finally gotten around to fixing. But that wasn't even the worst part. Not even close. The bankruptcy filing is ready, Richard continued. We file Friday. By Monday, Hartman Restorations will be gutted. The money will be offshore, and we'll be set for life. I'm thinking Costa Rica. They don't extradite. I nearly stopped breathing. Bankruptcy? Offshore money? What in God's name was he talking about? What about the employees? Kyle asked, not with concern, but idle curiosity, like he was asking about the weather. They should have saved more, Gloria dismissed, a wave of her hand. Not our problem. 31 people who should have planned better. And the vendors? They'll get pennies on the dollar in the bankruptcy proceedings, Richard shrugged, a sound I could hear in his voice. Maybe nothing. That's business. 31 employees. Families. Michael, working double shifts for his wife's cancer treatments. David, with the company since before I was born. Maria, putting 2 kids through college. They were going to destroy them all and just walk away. I had to grip the doorframe to keep from collapsing. But then, my blood ran cold. What about Ethan? Kyle asked. He's been asking questions about the Henderson account discrepancies. Noticed some numbers didn't add up. A pause. Then Richard, his voice chillingly calm, spoke. Don't worry about Ethan. After Friday, he won't be able to cause any problems. I've already got the termination letter ready. We'll say he was skimming from the parts inventory. Been doing it for years. Easy to prove with some creative documentation. Will anyone believe that? Kyle sounded skeptical. Who's going to question it? Gloria scoffed, a sneer in her voice. The adopted kid versus the real family? Please. We've been building this narrative for years. Ethan the screw-up. Ethan who can't manage money. Ethan who's jealous of his successful brother. By the time we're done, everyone will believe he was stealing from his own grandfather's company. Adopted. The word struck me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. You think he ever suspected? Kyle asked. That he's adopted? Richard snorted. Please. The kid's so desperate for our approval, he'd believe anything we told him. We've been using him for free labor for a decade. He never questioned why we treat Kyle differently because he's too pathetic to consider the obvious answer. They all laughed then. All 3 of them. Laughing at me. At how stupid I was. At how easily they'd manipulated me my entire life. I don't remember walking back to my room that night. Don't remember much of anything except lying on my bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling like the entire floor had dropped out from under me. Adopted. They were going to frame me. Destroy 31 families. And they'd been planning it for years. But as the shock began to recede, something else ignited inside me. Not sadness. Not self-pity. This was cold, calculated anger. They thought I was pathetic. Stupid. They thought I'd just roll over and take it, like I always had. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Here's the critical detail they completely missed. Last month, Richard had knee surgery. Nothing serious, but he needed someone to handle business matters while he recovered. So, he gave me power of attorney. Full access to every account, every document, every system in the company. And in the post-op chaos of his return to work, no one remembered to revoke it. The grandfather clock chimed midnight as I slipped into Richard's study. My hands shook as I pulled open the mahogany drawer where he kept his important documents. What I found confirmed everything and more. Kyle Hartman. Kyle Hartman. Kyle Hartman. Every deed, every investment account, every document bore my brother's name. The company I'd poured my life into, Kyle Hartman, sole beneficiary. The house I grew up in, Kyle Hartman, future owner. Even the equipment I'd personally selected and maintained was listed as Kyle's property. But the financial records, those were the real smoking gun. Over the past 18 months, Richard and Gloria had systematically bled Hartman Restorations dry. I traced every transaction, every shell company, every offshore wire transfer. Ghost employees on payroll, drawing salaries that vanished into hidden accounts, nearly $400,000 in the last year alone. Inflated vendor contracts, kickbacks funneled to companies Richard secretly controlled, another $2 million. Equipment purchases billed twice, 3 times, to different budget categories. The same diagnostic computer supposedly bought 6 times. Fake insurance claims, phantom repairs, client deposits that never reached the actual accounts. $8 million. They'd stolen $8 million from the company Grandpa Charles built, planning to take the rest before declaring bankruptcy. And tucked behind all those damning financials? A manila folder labeled Confidential 1999. Inside was my adoption certificate. Ethan Hartman, adopted by Richard and Gloria Hartman. Date of adoption, March 15, 1999. I was 3 years old when they took me in. And they'd never, not once in 25 years, told me. I photographed absolutely everything. Every document, every email on the shared drive detailing their scheme, every wire transfer confirmation, every forged invoice. Then I found the emails specifically about me. Ethan's getting suspicious. He asked about the Henderson account discrepancies. The reply, "Don't worry, I've already prepared the documentation to frame him." Backdated receipts, forged signatures on expense reports. After Friday, Ethan will be facing embezzlement charges while we're sipping cocktails on the beach. Perfect. The ungrateful little charity case finally gets what he deserves. Charity case. That's what they thought of me. The son they'd adopted, only to spend 25 years resenting me for not being their real child. I didn't sleep that night. I had too much to do. The next morning, I called my buddy Sam. We'd been friends since high school, stayed close even when my family tried to isolate me. He'd become a sharp corporate attorney. "I need to meet you," I told him. "It's urgent. And bring whatever paperwork you need to set up a protective trust." When I showed Sam everything, the fraud evidence, the bankruptcy plan, the scheme to frame me, the adoption certificate, his face cycled through 17 different emotions in 30 seconds. "Ethan," he said slowly, setting down the papers. This is massive. We're talking federal crimes here. Wire fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy. They're looking at serious prison time. I know. Your whole family, your parents, your brother. They could all go to prison for decades. I know that, too." He studied my face for a long moment. "What do you want to do?" I looked him straight in the eye. "I want to save the company, protect the employees, and make sure my family faces consequences for what they've done." Sam nodded, as if he'd expected that answer. "Then we've got about 60 hours before they file that bankruptcy. Let's get to work." Over the next 48 hours, we executed a plan that would have made Grandpa Charles incredibly proud. First, we secured the assets. Using my still valid power of attorney, I transferred $12 million, every liquid asset the company had, into a protected trust account, specifically structured to benefit creditors and employees. Completely legal. I was acting to protect stakeholders from fraudulent bankruptcy proceedings. Sam walked me through every step, ensuring every document was properly filed, every transfer authorized. We weren't cutting corners. We were simply doing exactly what the law required when corporate fraud was discovered. Second, Sam flagged the suspicious transactions to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. This wasn't anonymous. We went in person, sat down with Agent Rodriguez, and laid out everything I'd found. Turns out, they'd already been monitoring some of Richard and Gloria's offshore accounts from a separate investigation. My meticulous documentation was the missing piece they needed. Third, and this was the part that truly mattered to me, we reached out to the senior employees. I met them at a diner 5 miles from the shop, neutral territory. David McCready, with the company for 30 years, Maria Torres, who ran our parts department like a general, Mark Kowalski, head of our paint division, Sarah Walsh, the office manager who'd taught me the business side, and Michael Simmons, our night security guard, who'd let me into the building at 2 a.m. without asking questions. They already knew something was wrong. They'd been documenting their own suspicions for months, strange transactions, equipment that never arrived, ghost employees they'd never seen. They just hadn't known who to trust. When I showed them what I'd found, the bankruptcy plan, the offshore accounts, the 31 families Richard and Gloria were planning to destroy, The room went silent. Then David McCready, a grizzled old mechanic who'd known me since I was a teenager, looked me dead in the eye. "Your grandfather hired me when I was 19, Ethan," he said, his voice rough. "Gave me a chance when no one else would. Taught me everything I know. I watched him build this company from nothing. And I'll be damned if I let his son destroy it." One by one, they pledged their support. Maria with her spreadsheets of suspicious transactions. Mark with records of equipment that existed on paper but never in the shop. Sarah with copies of forged signatures. Michael with security footage showing Kyle removing files late at night. For the first time in my life, I had an army at my back. People who actually gave a damn. People who saw my value when my own parents never could. The explosion hit Thursday morning. I was in the break room, nursing my third coffee, when Kyle burst through the door. His designer suit was wrinkled, his hair disheveled. The golden boy had clearly had a rough morning. "You." He pointed at me, his voice a strangled squawk. "What did you do?" I calmly looked up. "Good morning to you too, Kyle. Coffee? Don't play games with me. The accounts are frozen. The transfers won't go through. Richard's been on the phone with the bank for 2 hours, and they keep mentioning a trust protection order." "What did you do?" I set down my magazine, taking a slow, deliberate sip of coffee. "Sounds like someone's been managing the company's assets responsibly. You know, the thing you were supposed to be doing all these years while you were actually just showing up for photo ops." His face went purple. "You had no right." Actually, I had power of attorney, full legal authority. And when I noticed some, let's call them irregularities in the company finances, to the tune of about $8 million, I took steps to protect the creditors and employees. "You're welcome." That's when Richard and Gloria appeared in the doorway. Gloria was pale, her perfect makeup smudged. Richard looked like he was one blood pressure point away from a stroke. "Ethan," Richard said, using my full name in that terrifying tone he reserved for serious confrontations. "We need to talk." "In my office." "Now." So we talked. The three of them sat on one side of Richard's massive desk like it was a tribunal, Kyle on the left, Gloria on the right, Richard in the center, a self-appointed judge. I sat across from them, completely calm. I'd been preparing for this moment for 48 hours. They'd been lying to me for 28 years. I knew their weaknesses, their tells, their patterns. For the first time in my life, I had the undeniable advantage. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Richard demanded, his face red, veins bulging. The exact look he used to give me when he wanted me to back down. I didn't back down anymore. "Protecting Hartman Restorations," I said simply. "From fraud." The word hung in the air like a live grenade. "You don't know what you're talking about," Gloria blustered, but her voice cracked. "Oh, don't I?" I pulled out my phone and started reading. Ghost invoices paid to Cayman Islands accounts. Double-billed equipment purchases. Contracts inflated by 20% with the excess disappearing offshore. Ghost employees drawing salaries for work they never did because they don't exist. A bankruptcy filing scheduled for tomorrow that would destroy 31 families while you three sail off to Costa Rica. No one moved. And my personal favorite, I continued, watching their faces contort, the plan to frame me for embezzlement when I got too close to the truth. "Really? Backdated receipts and forged expense reports? You honestly thought that would hold up to investigation?" Kyle lunged across the desk. I easily sidestepped, and he sprawled onto the floor, knocking over Richard's lamp. "Careful," I said, my voice deliberately even. "Wouldn't want to add assault to your list of federal charges. Although, honestly, at this point, what's one more?" "How dare you?" Gloria hissed. "After everything we've done for you. We took you in when nobody wanted you. We gave you a home, a family, and this is how you repay us." I laughed. Actually laughed out loud. "A family? You mean the family that made me pay rent while Kyle lived free? The family that gave him credit for my work? The family that forgot my birthdays and threw parties when Kyle passed his driver's test on his third try? That family. You were always so ungrateful." Richard snarled. "Do you know how much it costs to raise you, to feed you, to put a roof over your head? You owe us everything." "What I owe," I said, standing up, my voice steady, "is to the 31 employees you were planning to betray. To the vendors you were going to stiff. To Grandpa Charles's legacy that you were going to destroy for a beach house in Costa Rica. That's who I owe. Not you. Never you. Richard's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and went white. Who is it? Gloria whispered. Unknown number. He answered it, and I watched his face drain of all color as he listened. When he hung up, his hand was shaking. That was the FBI, he croaked. They want to talk to all of us. They're sending agents now. I smiled. I know. I called them 2 days ago. The next few hours were the most satisfying of my entire life. FBI agents swarmed the building with warrants for everything: financial records, computers, files. They'd already been building a case, but my meticulous records were the missing piece. Kyle was the first to be arrested. They found him trying to shred documents in the back office. He started crying, blubbering that it wasn't his idea, that Richard and Gloria made him do it. Classic Kyle, never taking responsibility. Gloria went next. She tried the "I'm just a wife, I didn't know anything about the business" defense until they showed her the emails where she discussed which employees to fire first and how to maximize the pain for those ungrateful workers. Richard was last. He tried to bluff, playing the successful businessman unfairly targeted. That lasted until they started listing the charges: wire fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, conspiracy, attempted fraud. The list went on and on. He stopped in front of me on his way out, hands cuffed behind his back. "We raised you," he spat. "We gave you everything." "You gave me scraps," I replied, my voice cold. "And then you tried to take even those away. Grandpa Charles built this company on integrity. You destroyed it with greed. The difference between us is that I actually learned something from him." "You'll regret this," he snarled, pure venom in his voice. "Blood is thicker than water, boy. Family is everything." "You're right," I said. "Family is everything. That's why I'm protecting the family that actually matters, the 31 people who built this company while you were busy stealing from it." They loaded him into the car. I never saw him outside a courtroom again. Now, here's where it gets truly astonishing. Remember Grandpa Charles's will? Turns out, there was more to it than anyone knew. 2 days after the arrests, I got a call from Grandpa's lawyer who handled his estate. He asked me to come to his office for an urgent matter. It seemed Grandpa Charles had suspected Richard's greed for years. He'd watched how Richard and Gloria treated me, seen the financial manipulation even before he got sick. And he'd prepared. There was a codicil to the will, a secret edition activated only under specific circumstances, if the company faced bankruptcy or if any family member faced criminal charges related to fraud. The codicil stated that in such an event, all ownership of Hartman Restorations would transfer immediately to me. "Your grandfather came to me 5 years ago, Ethan," the lawyer explained. "He knew what his son was capable of. He wanted to ensure the company he'd built would survive. And he wanted to ensure you would be the one to save it." He handed me a letter. Grandpa Charles's handwriting, shaky but determined. "My dearest Ethan, if you're reading this, then my worst fears have come true. My son has chosen greed over honor, and Hartman Restorations faces its darkest hour. I've watched you grow from that scared little boy your Aunt Sophia brought to our door into a man of integrity and strength. Blood doesn't make family, son. Character does. You've shown more dedication to our legacy than Richard ever did. Save our company. Save our people. Be the Hartman I always knew you could be. All my love, Grandpa Charles." I won't lie. I had to step out for a minute when I read that. The trial lasted 3 brutal months. Federal court, packed galleries, daily news coverage. The evidence was overwhelming. Between my documentation, the employee records, and the FBI's investigation, there was no escape. I testified on the second day, walking into that courtroom, sitting 10 feet from the people who'd raised me. Gloria wouldn't look at me. Richard glared, as if trying to burn holes through my skull. Carl just looked broken, a child finally learning actions have consequences. I told the jury everything: the fraud I'd uncovered, the plan to frame me, the bankruptcy scheme that would have destroyed 31 families, the adoption I'd never known about, and how they'd used it as justification for treating me as less than human my entire life. When Gloria's lawyer tried to discredit me, calling me a disgruntled employee seeking revenge, suggesting I'd fabricated evidence. The prosecutors simply showed the jury the emails. The ungrateful little charity case finally gets what he deserves. He's so pathetic he'd believe anything we told him. After Friday, Ethan will be facing embezzlement charges while we're sipping cocktails on the beach. That pretty much obliterated their defense. Richard got 12 years. Gloria got 8. Carl got 10, plus an additional 2 for obstruction when he tried to destroy evidence. Paul Duca, Richard's business partner, who facilitated the offshore transfers, flipped on everyone and got 5 years. But the real victory wasn't watching them get sentenced. It was what happened to Hartman Restorations. With controlling interest now legally mine, thanks to Grandpa Charles's codicil, I had a choice. I could run the company myself, cash out and disappear with the money, or do something truly different. I chose door number 3. We converted Hartman Restorations into an employee-owned company. The 31 workers who would have lost everything instead became part owners of a $15 million business. I'll never forget the day we signed the papers. David McCready, who'd been with the company for 30 years, stared at his shares like they weren't real. "First time I've ever owned anything of real value," he said, his voice rough. "First time in my whole life." Maria Torres used her equity stake to finally pay off her kids' student loans. Mark Kowalski took a sabbatical, his first real vacation in 15 years, and came back energized with new ideas. Sarah Walsh got promoted to CFO because no one knows the company finances better than she does. And Michael Simmons, the night security guard who'd let me into the building at 2 a.m. without asking questions, he used his shares to finally get his wife the cancer treatment she needed, the treatment not covered by insurance, the one he'd been working double shifts for 3 years to afford. His daughter, Maria, graduated with an honors degree in accounting last month. She works in our finance department now, ensuring what Richard and Gloria did can never happen again. As for me, I kept a small ownership stake, but stepped back from day-to-day operations. The company is in excellent hands with people who genuinely care, people who earn their positions through hard work, not nepotism. I used part of my share to find my biological family. Hired someone to track down my records, trace my history, figure out where I actually came from. My birth mother, Emily, had indeed passed away when I was 3. That part of the story was true. But her sister, my Aunt Sophia, had been searching for me for 20 years. She'd sent letters to the Hartman house every year on my birthday, cards at Christmas, photos of my mother, my grandparents, of the family I never knew I had. Richard and Gloria? They'd thrown them all away. 20 years of letters gone. When Sophia and I finally met, it was surreal. She looked like me. Same eyes, same stubborn chin, the same way of standing like we're ready for whatever comes next. She told me about my mother. Emily was 22 when she had me, poor, working 2 jobs, no support system. She thought giving me to the Hartmans would give me a better life. They seemed successful, stable, good people. She didn't know what they really were. Nobody did. Sophia now has pictures of my mother holding me as a baby, of my grandparents who passed before they could know I existed, of a family that wanted me. 6 months later, Legacy Restorations, that's our new name, just posted its best quarter in company history. Revenue up 23%. We've been featured in 3 industry publications as a model for employee ownership. But here's the real update you guys want to hear. Last Tuesday, I got a call from Agent Rodriguez at the FBI. Turns out Richard and Gloria had been trying to run a scheme from inside prison. They'd convinced some old business associate to help them hide assets the feds had missed, a storage unit in Nevada with about $200,000 in cash, and some bearer bonds Grandpa Charles had bought back in the 80s. The associate got cold feet and contacted the authorities. Now Richard's facing another 5 to 8 years tacked onto his sentence. Gloria's facing 3 to 5. Carl tried to cut a deal by testifying against them again. The prosecutor laughed him out of the room. Apparently, my parents made me do it doesn't work twice. But wait, it gets better. Remember Paul Duca, Richard's business partner who flipped? He got released early for good behavior last month. 2 days later, he showed up at Legacy Restorations asking for a job. David McCready was the one who met him at the door. told him, "We don't hire people who steal from their employees." Paul tried to argue he'd paid his debt to society. David reminded him that Michael Simmons' daughter, Maria, had to defer college for 2 years because of what he helped do to her father's pension. Paul left and hasn't been back. 3 weeks ago, I got a certified letter from a law firm in Chicago. Turns out my birth mother, Emily, had a life insurance policy that Richard and Gloria had been collecting on for 25 years. They'd forged documents to make themselves the beneficiaries after Emily died. Sophia and I are suing to recover the funds. Our lawyer says it's an open and shut case. The Hartmans are going to have to pay back every penny, plus interest. We are donating it all to the Emily Chin Memorial Fund. Speaking of which, we awarded our first 2 scholarships last week. A kid named Marcus from the South Side who wants to be a diesel mechanic, and a girl named Jenny whose dad worked at Legacy for 15 years before he passed. Full rides for both of them, trade school, tools, living expenses, everything. Sophia cried when we handed out the certificates. So did I, honestly. Oh, and one more thing. Last month, I was going through some of Grandpa Charles's old papers that Sophia had saved. Found a letter he wrote to my birth mother, Emily, back in 1999, right after the adoption. He tried to contact her, tried to make sure she was okay, that she knew I was being taken care of. Richard and Gloria intercepted the letter and never sent it. But Grandpa Charles kept a copy. In it, he promised Emily that he'd watch over me, that he'd make sure I grew up knowing I was valued, that he'd protect me from his son if it ever came to that. He kept that promise. Even from the grave, he kept it. Final update. Someone asked what happened to the house I grew up in. The feds seized it as part of the asset forfeiture. It went to auction last month. I bought it. Not to live in, God no. Too many painful memories clung to those walls. Instead, I donated it to a nonprofit that provides transitional housing for young adults aging out of foster care. Kids who leave the system with nowhere to go. Kids like I might have been if Richard and Gloria hadn't taken me in. The organization renamed it the Charles Hartman House after my grandfather. There are 6 young people living there now, getting job training and life skills support. Learning that they matter, that someone gives a damn about them. The first resident moved in 3 weeks ago. A kid named Terrence, 19 years old, aged out of foster care with nothing but a garbage bag of clothes. He's working at Legacy now, learning to restore classic cars. David McCready took him under his wing. Last week, Terrence asked me why I did all this. Why I bought the house, started the scholarships, gave him a job. I told him the truth. Someone did it for me once. A grandfather who saw me when nobody else did. Now it's my turn to pass it on. He nodded like he understood. Then he went back to work on a 1969 Camaro we're restoring for a client in Texas. Good kid. Reminds me of myself at that age. Hungry, determined, ready to prove everyone wrong. It's been a long journey, from invisible child to, well, this. What would you have done if you discovered such a deep betrayal from your own family? Was my response justified, or did I go too far? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'm really interested to hear what you all think.